Jeff, welcome. Great to have you back.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me back on.
I've got something to tell you guys. I feel fortunate to be here today because I had the Rona this weekend, and it was rough on Friday, man. I had to binge watch Breaking Bad in between taking naps for like 12 hours straight. Then I slept all night, then did that again for day 2, and poof, I feel great suddenly. Just Breaking Bad napping, and here I am sitting with you two gentlemen, feeling like the luckiest guy in the world. And Jeff, I am aware that you're going to have to take this to the Canadian Ministry of Truth and Health to clear yourself after having a virtual conference with somebody that was corona positive. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm surprised I don't have to have a mask on.
Yeah, put on your cyber mask.
I should put on my mask. Hold on.
Yeah, geez Louise, Josh getting COVID and getting a couple weeks off free of work. Dream come true.
It's only 5 days now, man. They're cutting us short.
A lot of aerospace engineering nerding out, podcast books, and I hate to say it, Jeff, but probably a bottle of lotion somewhere nearby as well. You know what I'm saying?
No, you can't pin me down on that one.
Jeff, how are you?
Really great, thanks.
What makes you really great? Give us a little life update. It's been a while since we've chatted. What's going on, Bitcoin or non-Bitcoin in your life?
It's still busy across different companies. I think different companies are experiencing different pain right now because of the credit crisis. But I'm able to have a lot of my own time. In that time, we're going to travel again this year as a family. We're going to travel the world again this year as a family and work from the road. So it's what's not to love.
Incredible. What place are you most excited about visiting in 2023?
Oh, I never know until I'm there. And then when somebody asks after the fact, what's your favorite place? You like them all for different reasons. So yeah. It's really, really hard to pin that down.
What surprised you this year from your travels? Like, what area were you most surprised by in terms of how much you enjoyed
Portugal. Loved Portugal. Loved Madeira. We'd been to Spain, Italy before. This time we went into Sicily, which was really different. But really, we spent just over a month in Portugal, and then I went back and really loved that.
Before we move off from companies having a hard time, did you guys hear about the CFO from Bed Bath & Beyond? What happened to him?
Yep.
He jumped out of a 12th-story balcony in New York because, obviously things are going really sideways for them. But, things are really, really tough out there. When you're hearing about stuff like that going on, it's sad.
It's a healthy reminder to all of us that these are intellectually fulfilling topics to explore and interesting, but they have very profound and meaningful implications for our species. And they're
you guys see, Josh and Dan, you guys see that in your work. Right? You see the anxiety ratcheting up in your work all the time. What's going on in the world has profound implications. And what I would say to that specific point, when you're in that mode, it's really hard for you to see abundance and when you see kind of all the alternative paths for you. It's easy to get so locked into the path you're in and stay there. And as a result, that fear holds you back from seeing everything that's possible. But I see it in businesses where people they get stuck into a wall, they get backed into a wall, and they actually they make it. Every decision from there makes it worse for them because they fail to see the opportunities. And while each person thinks they're immune to it, they're not immune to it. Boards get trapped into it. It just feeds back on itself. That fear is paralyzing.
Yeah. We've talked about this quite a bit on this show, but what our species has undergone the last few years, whether it makes sense or not, and whatever your opinion is on that, people have been dramatically isolated. and that has implications. And it's hard. We have a tiny sample size. We're, firefighter paramedics in one medium-sized municipality. But I think most of the people that work at our department would agree that anxiety and fear have accelerated quite a bit in the last couple of years, for sure. And I think a lot of that's just a function of people being more separated from community. It's a good reminder to all of us, like, get out of isolation. If all you do is sit behind a computer all day and you're never around people in the flesh, like, get plugged in somewhere, whatever that is, and do face-to-face and have accountability and build strong relationships, because that's what gives us a lot of balance. A lot of balance.
We see people all the time that are so holed up, they don't even have a single friend or family, and that's just extremely detrimental for human nature. You need to have someone to just bounce the day's events off of, or have some outreach to some outsiders. Otherwise, you just literally go insane. Yeah. I think the Russians proved that by putting people in a capsule for like 2 months, and they will kill each other. Like, they just have to have outside resources.
Jeff,
yeah,
as we get...
The real value in life isn't wealth, it's relationships.
Well said.
Amen to that. Amen to that. All right, as we get into some of the meat and potatoes here, this is sort of where I want to start. We both read The Price of Tomorrow a while ago now, closer to when it came out. And a lot's changed in the world since you wrote it. I know some has changed in terms of you getting more plugged into the Bitcoin community since you wrote it. I think the word Bitcoin appeared maybe once in the book. And then you've obviously followed it up with a ton of work, time, and energy. What has changed the most in your mind, most significantly and impactfully, either in the world or in your worldview since you wrote the book? Like, what's the biggest addition in your own head since this book was published?
Well, the thesis and nothing I wrote in the book isn't coming true. Right?
Yes.
So everything is playing out exactly as predicted. In fact, when I talked about how much more printing needed to come, then it was an exponential path trying to offset the path of technology. There was a paragraph that I put in there that you could essentially predict how much printing had to come, and you still can.
Yeah, I think I recall in the book you mentioned the Fed's balance sheet was at $4 trillion. So quite a bit's happened since that.
The only thing that's changed, it seems, is the excuse for the printing. Now the printing is to prevent inflation, right?
Yeah, and so all of these things are just, you can see all the next steps laying out. If I answered the question honestly, at the time, even though I was a Bitcoin holder in 2017, or kind of small Bitcoin holder in 2017, I thought it was one plausible path to the other side. And now I think it's the only plausible path to the other side. I'm not saying that there aren't other things that are going to be tried. I'm not saying that there's not going to be a lot of more FUD and different things that are going to switch or change around that could, for a time, make that look like it's not going to happen. But I see in the end, it's the only path.
What are the other alternatives that you can think of that could be positioned as this is the proper way we should undertake this change instead of Bitcoin? What do you visualize there?
Well, so all the others, every other one is a top-down structure that imposes something on people. Every so let's use gold for Luke would talk about gold as a potential path forward, and you reprice gold. And so for that to happen, you have to trust Russia, China, and the U.S. to agree who has how much, and Germany to agree who has how much gold. Trust that they're not going to break rules and reprice together, and so those nations would have to agree to that, or force or create game theory to create that to happen, and force that to happen, and then that would create every other nation an advantage for them to essentially a repricing of all other nations that would create every other nation to say, wait, why are we doing this? And so it is one potential path, but I don't know if it's logical in the end that it actually happens. I think it might be tried, but I think ultimately that fails as a result of not everyone will go along with it.
Is one thing this makes me think of, Jeff. So if we're gaming out, okay, let's say Bitcoin's not the answer and we move back to a gold standard of sorts. Well, monetary history has shown us that gold basically doesn't hold up to the 21st century, is one way of putting it. Like, monetary velocity needs of the 21st century are not met by a yellow metal. And that is then inherently centralizing. And you could say debt producing, right? Because even if gold is at the base, you're moving towards a centralized ledger-based system, which we've seen over time leads to credit and debt beyond what you could say would be natural, right? What this makes me think of and where I'm going is you had a quote at the Bitcoin 2022 conference. It was sort of my standout quote. We've tweeted it a couple times where you basically explained that Bitcoin is a form of money that has hardness, but also allows for velocity of money in a system that's not backed by debt. I'm going to give you the floor. Why don't you unpack that statement a little more and why the implications of that are so profound?
Yeah, and if you just go back to the just original thesis and say, is technology deflationary? Or does technology produce productivity, and is that productivity deflationary? There still isn't anybody that questions that thesis.
Right.
Yet they go directly to the next thing. We must live in an inflationary monetary policy, which is at odds with that. So just out of that, what I just said there, you could look back at the long arc of history, and you could say why are those two things at odds, and what ends up happening with those two things at odds. And you could look even back to Roman times with those two things at odds and technology moving more slowly. What that would mean is the currency would fail more slowly. But it would fail over 600 years instead of over 100 years or 50 years. And then you advance and technology moves faster and faster, and currencies start failing every 200 years. And then they fail every 100 years. And today they fail every 50 years. Or even the US dollar failed in 1971. And then the Petro Reserve dollar is failing now. And that's all because technology is moving faster and faster on one side, and we've lived in a monetary regime always that we had to have a centralizing function around gold that then creates an incentive for banks to first lend out if you lent out gold 1 for 1, you can't make any money. So you apply leverage, and that leverage over time explodes to a point where politicians don't want to let this system fail. And by the way, it's not just politicians, it's us. Our human nature would vote for politicians who would tell us we can get something for nothing. So they get to a point where we are in the cycle today where they'll print and they'll debase a currency because it's the least worst option in their minds. But that least worst option takes humanity to a path of war and a reset. And so that's what, if you just look through history, that's what always happens. And if I unpacked what I just said there, and a lot of people are looking at Bitcoin just as at the kind of protocol level at Bitcoin only, the reserve current, or the kind of the asset. And they don't see what's happening on top of Lightning that creates a peer-to-peer transaction network through technology that offers unlimited velocity of money. That unlimited velocity of money on a bearer instrument that is secure and decentralized means you don't have to recreate a debt-based system that constantly goes through those failings before 600 years, now 50 years. You don't have to do that. You can build a new system backed by technology and proof of work that it literally changes everything. I know we're going to get into something, but our existing system that we measure everything by, and our history as a human species, looking back at all of the other examples, can't see this because they're looking at at prior work that didn't have this velocity of money into a bearer instrument that didn't. So our old systems needed to create debt, and that debt was subject to human nature, which we are all subject to, which constantly made the system worse and worse and more unstable as the system went on until it broke. This changes that paradigm forever.
Yeah, I want to play devil's advocate just for a moment, because gold does seem like the most logical thing, as you mentioned, besides Bitcoin. And because gold is already owned by the largest states that you mentioned, China, Germany, Russia, they all have a stake in that game. And clearly they prefer centralized power. They don't want to relieve power in any capacity if they can have any say so. So those 2 points on like gold is already owned by them and it centralizes power, which is a benefit to them. Bitcoin currently, I mean, maybe small portions of it are owned by states. We don't really know exactly, but certainly not anywhere near as much as the gold is.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is generally not easy to centralize. So given those facts, and then looking at it through maybe the position of somebody at the Fed or somebody at the Treasury who wants to remain in power, what kind of events do you think would have to happen in order for gold to, and I understand the technological side of it, believe me, and I'm 100% with you. I'm just trying to take the counter opposite argument by somebody who says they're not going to relieve this power and they're definitely not going to allow it to be decentralized. How would you approach that argument?
Yeah, and one of the things I think is really important in all of these conversations is every time somebody says they, who are they? Right?
Yeah.
Who specifically?
The Illuminati.
Yeah, exactly. Who specifically are they, and how can they do this? Because we give them control.
Yeah.
All of we choose. And
we are they.
We are they. Right. And
we are them when we're Canadian truckers, and your teeth kicked down your throat and thrown in the gutter.
Even what you just said about Canadian truckers, and how involved I was in and I was involved in it for the right for free speech. That's why I was involved.
Absolutely, and that's why we were all proponents of it.
And what most people don't realize is that spread all around the world, and everybody, and what it made Canada look like, but what Trudeau looked like all around the world. He did more for Bitcoin. He did more for Bitcoin adoption than any other leader ever has, besides El Salvador. But he did a lot for Bitcoin adoption. And somebody in Oslo came up to me and said, "What you did saved countless lives in the Ukraine." And I went, "What?" And it blew me, because I faced the blowback of that here, but that kind of broke my brain in the Ukraine. And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, when all the banks closed, we had a perfect prototype to be able to get safety equipment, vests, hard hats out to the field, and medical supplies out to the field, and there was no stoppage. It literally happened that day because we copied everything you did, and we only knew to start looking at that solution because of the media attention about the truckers. So that actually accelerates adoption everywhere, and you never know that butterfly effect of something happening over here changes minds somewhere else.
There were two, at least in my mind, from my lens, there were two events in the last year that I think will stand out when we look back in terms of being sort of billboards for the Bitcoin use case. One was what happened in Canada, and most surprising because it's Canada. You know what I mean? If you hear about that in some, autocratic South American country, it hits completely different. But the fact that unilaterally taking control of bank accounts overnight
retroactively, retroactively changing the rules and going back to people retroactively.
Yep. So that was sort of like one domestic example, right, where it was kind of flashing orange B. The other one was more of an international banking example of the United States freezing Russian FX reserves. Like that was like on this. We saw it at the domestic level, and then this is sort of the sovereign international level. Just the overwhelming need that is going to arise in the future by both good and bad actors for a neutral reserve asset that can be self-custodied, that isn't at the whim of centralized policymakers.
What you're saying right now is the thing that Josh is actually saying as well. And so even Putin's speech recently effectively said that, right? And now as people are agreeing, and so now everybody is waking up to the fact that a fiat currency like this can't work. And what it does, and more people are waking up to the fact that capitalism and communism under printed money are the exact same construct. They don't have a vote in a free society. If 70% of the income comes from printed money, right? They don't have a vote in inflation, and so the taxes and politics is just theater on who gets to be on top and print the money. So more and more people are waking up to that fact all over the world. So and that accelerates more and more people looking for a solution. And now as they look for a solution, sorry, Josh.
No, it's all good.
They look for a solution. Many of them are going to start holding Bitcoin. Many of them, and some are going to kind of rally around: should it be gold? Should it be raw materials? How are we going to price something? And there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of head fakes in the next little while. The system is getting is continuing to get more and more unstable, and people want to point to the one event that created the instability. And it's not one event. It's a multitude of events.
Decades of events.
Yeah.
The two of you guys, I'm sure, have seen this in the last few days. Did you see that this, I don't remember the guy's title from Russia, but they closed Nord Stream and they said there was a leak initially. And now they're saying this is literally a tit for tat for weaponizing the financial system. And that is a hell of a statement to just make overtly. How do you see this playing out from here? Like this is kind of an escalating economic war that doesn't seem to be ending soon. How do you think Europe's going to do? They're going to have to relent for this winter, I'm imagining.
Yeah, Josh, and Dan, you know the chapter in my book, Us versus Them, right? And how what would happen if you had essentially a fraud at the base layer of currency all over the world, and the world was moving faster and faster technology. Why I wrote Us versus Them is you could see what would happen throughout society, and society is sitting through that misinformation, and they're really confused. In fact, I don't know if you've read that piece that I recently put out, Finding Signal in a Noisy World.
I have not yet. I'll check it out.
So you should read that and post it in the show notes. It's really important. So I talked about why Bitcoin, why people misunderstand it, because people misunderstand protocols. Protocols are really hard to understand because they develop in layers. And if you lived in a system where all money is information, right? And you actually don't want more money. And I can prove it to you, because if you wanted more money, a Venezuelan bolivar would be equal to a US dollar. You want more of what you believe money will buy you. What you believe money will buy you is status, hope for your family, a vacation, a whole bunch of things. That's why that's what money is. So when you have money which is just information, and then you apply misinformation to money, the world is looking through that misinformation. And every single person in the world looking through that misinformation thinks they have perfect information, and they're in their own silo. thinking everybody else is insane because they have imperfect information.
Yep.
But and you could argue that. You could argue us too, because we're looking through the misinformation as well.
For sure.
And
we
so
are looking through the misinformation. Anybody that doesn't think that thinks their lens on anything is perfect is off base.
We have to, because money is only information. And when you manipulate money, it amplifies misinformation. If you manipulate money and misinformation, and you automate that misinformation through Twitter, Facebook, everything else, what do you think happens? You have an engineering problem that creates. I used to say that to technology companies, don't automate shit, right? It just creates faster shit. Fix the process first and then automate. And this is so we have a broken process in money. We have misinformation in money, and we're amplifying it throughout society. And people wonder, why are people confused? And it's really easy to see why people are confused, because that misinformation is carrying around in the world. And now you have a different system that, as people are becoming confused, more and more people are opting out and moving into the new system. And as those people start to, what you're doing on this podcast, what others are doing on the podcast, and questioning that misinformation, is bringing more and more people onto something true. Everything that we're saying can be audited, right? Bitcoin's open source, it's decentralized, it's secure. In my piece, I talk about why that's so important, and then what happens on top of that. But everything that I put out there, you could audit for yourself. You can, and so you have something that is based on truth, hope, and abundance, better future on one side, and you have something that's based on more and more misinformation, a political class that is essentially stealing from you at a greater and greater rate on the other side, and amplifying more misinformation. My hope is, so that we can avoid the worst of what's coming, my hope is that more and more people, the amplification of the misinformation amplifies the truth.
Yeah. It's almost like the stinkier it gets, the more people recognize that their nose is in a diaper.
But even saying what I just said, if we go back to the beginning where we were talking about fear, when people are in a state of fear, they're easily able to be manipulated.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't come out of the fear to look at all their options. They stay in the fear. And so when I say it's my hope that emergent system is moving, and more people see that, I do realize that if you can't pay your bills and your energy bills just went up by 5 times, and you're going to lose your business and your family and everything else, and somebody says go buy Bitcoin, and you have no idea, you're likely to believe the status quo. You're likely to believe the person who says, I'm going to give you more free money.
Yeah,
and it's that.
That's the thing you understand.
It's that other person's fault. So, and that connects all the way back to saying we create the system. Right? Yep. More and more people understand the system change and want truth, hope, a better future. More and more people will move over and hopefully build a bridge for others to move over to as well.
It does feel like, you're talking about people sort of smelling the shit more than they have before. It does seem that even these topics have entered the public consciousness in a brand new way in the last, say, 3 to 4 years. Like, your average individual, and I'm not saying everybody meets this criteria, but is more aware of the Fed, fiat currency, inflation, right? You have, poignant examples of stuff just showing up in your bank account, and it talk of $1 trillion coins, these sorts of touch points that get the wheels spinning for people about just how artificial and fragile everything is. It's not the case for everybody, but I think a lot of people have more introductory events or themes than they have in the past to begin exploring what's actually going on underneath the surface.
But if we go back to it, what keeps me honest on this, on how far kind of in front of this we are, is seeing my friend group. I have a really wide friend group across the spectrum, and to say that they understand what's happening
wouldn't be fair.
Wouldn't be fair. They're not even close. And many of them have read my book. You'd think that these people, when I say friends, they're really close friends. And yes, some of them have a Bitcoin, some of them moved over. But to say that they know how important this is and what this looks like wouldn't be fair at all. Again, what makes me realize where we are in this cycle and how early we are in this cycle is seeing what the general public look at. And are seeing. They're not listening to they're not listening to this podcast, and we need to make sure that these types of things move out into a general audience rather than get reinforced into a small group of people.
One thing I do want you to touch on, because it comes through in the price of tomorrow, is just how dramatic wealth inequality is. Can you walk us through why an inherently fragile fiat, overly credit-based system has led to increased inequality in your mind, and maybe how that impacts, say, a middle-class firefighter?
Yeah, the best way to do it is through that Monopoly board example that I've often given. But if you if you play a game of Monopoly and you move around the board, you can say luck and timing determine how you do early in that board. Because on that board, if you collect some of the houses early and you get around the board without landing on others, then you have an advantage that reinforces on itself. And what ends up happening on the other side is somebody has a disadvantage that ends up reinforcing on themselves. Now, in that game, as you're going around the board, you're making more and more money. Somebody else is just hanging on. And what would happen in that game is if they got around to the board and pass and go, and they couldn't hang on anymore, normally the game would end, or somebody would kick over the game board, right? And super frustrated. But what would happen if that game couldn't end? It wasn't allowed to end. And instead of going around the game board, you couldn't pay for your groceries and housing anymore, and somebody said, oh, I'm going to give you $300 instead of $200. Well, the asset prices would just move up in lockstep, and they wouldn't be able to get around the board. And then oh, I'm going to give you $400. So all the asset prices would just move up, and they wouldn't get around the board. And that would keep happening. What that really is slavery. Somebody is picking your pocket, pretending they're giving you more money, and actually giving you less money. Because inflation is wage deflation. It is one and the same thing. That in inflation, it means your real wages are going down, and you can't keep up to the board game. So if you're on top of that board game and you control all the assets, it's a really great game for you. If you're on the bottom of that board game or in the middle of that board, it's a terrible game for you. So, and it's unsolvable from the existing political system. It's a structural problem that requires more and more easing, or you have an entire credit system failure that collapses.
Jeff, what we've been talking about is pretty somber, to be honest with you. And I was thinking maybe we can bring this a little more up key and try to think of some ways that this could actually turn out to be, things might actually go great. We might actually see things improve marginally from here, if not magnificently. And a couple of them that come to mind for me, and I want to bounce these off you to see what you think. It seems most likely would be like artificial intelligence, basically, improving productivity massively. And I'm sure that could be taken as people lose their jobs, but it's also people are going to get things done for massively cheaper. So there's kind of a give and take there. And then maybe, politicians pull their heads out of their asses and we produce nuclear power plants all over the world, or figure out fusion. Any other ways, or how do you see things potentially going really well from here?
So the irony in this is a mindset from an inflationary monetary policy that is directly at odds with what you just said. And here's what it is. Here's what's happening in Bitcoin overall. But you need to think about this at protocol level instead of a company level. But I'm going to use an example at a company level. If you're in Sears for 15 years, things are going really bad.
Jump out of the building.
If you're in Amazon, it's going really well. What side of that coin you're on matters a lot for your perception of what's happening in the world. Same world, two different outcomes, depending on what side that you're on. If you're living in the fiat-based system and you're measuring everything else in the fiat-based system, you're Sears. If you're if you're in Bitcoin, you're going to see a really positive outcome for the world, and it's going to get more and more positive. That's really what's happening. But it's way bigger than Sears Amazon because it's a protocol level affecting everything else. But now I need to connect what you just said and make this real, because some people get this piece when I wrote the book. Most people don't. When you say that productivity creates drastic price declines, and when you say that, what you're actually saying from the existing fiat system means those price declines must be offset with more printing. It must be, which creates the problem. So what you're actually saying is all of the things you want that create abundance can't create abundance in our existing system, because it has to be captured by the entitled class who chooses for us. That's what you're saying. In a free market, those prices are supposed to fall as labor comes out of the market. If you think about labor being kind of one piece of that productivity equation, we got better and better and better. And now if you think about, you're going to replace, use artificial. I saw one of the questions on your post. It talked about which technologies, and just like Bitcoin itself was a bunch of different technologies that came together with that kind of anchored around the 10-minute window, right? So the adjustment mechanism that created Bitcoin. People look at technologies individually instead of what happens together, and those things that come together create different things. So if you look at Palm Pilot versus iPhone, a lot of the same technology. And but iPhone came together at a different time that produced something totally new. And so now take artificial intelligence and robotics. And you could say artificial general intelligence, and you could take artificial intelligence where we are right now. Most call center jobs are gone. You might not care in the US, but in the Philippines and India, they'll care a lot. So most of those are gone. What's the next step? And then people think about these things as a light switch. One day we have artificial general intelligence. We're good to that point. And then everything changes, and they get scared. Oh, it's wait in the future, instead of a trend that is supposed to make make prices fall the entire trend all the way there. So now let's connect that and say artificial general intelligence is smarter than all of us at all things. One day, you could say it's 100 years, 50 years, 20 years, but one day it's going to be there on a trend. And robotics, every single form factor that you could think of, not just what you see today in Boston Robotics, dogs, and every single form factor that you can think of, micro, nanobots, every single form factor you could think of, and artificial intelligence merge. What jobs are protected? What jobs are we better at?
None.
Very few. And white collar is squarely in the crosshairs as well. That's what's happening as we're going exponential here. Is You could say blue collar's gotten phased out, but it's coming for everything.
Everything. And so shouldn't the tools that give us abundance instead of transfer that power to a very few who control us? That's the point. The whole point is that our ideas that we create, we build on top of and build on top of and that those ideas create more and more productivity that explodes in the world. And that productivity is supposed to reduce prices. And today it's supposed to reduce prices at a faster rate than it did 50 years ago and 100 years ago. And that faster rate is being offset by a faster rate of monetary easing.
Yeah. We want firefighter robots, Jeff, and we will just come wake surf with you all day. That's the plan.
Awesome.
I think it's worth a time out here for someone in the audience that hasn't read your book and is sitting here wondering, why can't they allow this to happen? I think we need to wrap this together. It just comes down to debt loads, essentially. When debt and credit have expanded to this point, and it makes me think of Foss sent a tweet recently, and then James Lavish and Pish talked about it last week. But the numbers are let's just take the U.S. to work through this. Tax receipts at $4.8 trillion. Entitlements are currently at $2.8 trillion out the door. You got defense spending at close to $1 trillion. Interest payments currently around $400 billion. You add in any other discretionary spending. What this spells is deficits galore. And when you look at debt loads, if we allow money to get more expensive, right, and prices to come down, the natural course of technological innovation, today's sovereign debt loads, not even to mention private sector included, are unsustainable. Like, there's an absolute snap in the system. There's widespread default, however that manifests. I guess where I want to go with this is the transition, right? I've just kind of spelled out the math of why it's ugly if you embrace this, right, in a way. What does this transition look like? You said earlier in the episode that you used to think Bitcoin was one of the possible solutions. Now you think it's the possible solution. How do we transition from this level of debt to an inelastic hard money at the base of everything, and how much pain is there in between?
So that's why the system can't do it from the system. No matter who you are in the system, it doesn't functionally work because the debt would cause if the Fed keeps tightening, they cannot keep tightening. If the Fed kept tightening, and it's not just interest rates, backdoor, there'll be a whole bunch of loosening while they have interest rates going up. But if they actually tightened and kept tightening, you would cause a complete credit collapse of the entire system globally. The U.S. dollar would race higher all over the world. That would put other countries who owed U.S. dollars to be able to pay their debts in default, and it would race around the world, and the U.S. dollar would be the last to fail. But that means every bank would fail. And so if you just because what people think is money is a credit instrument, and if credit collapses, that counterparty risk explodes through the system, and it just keeps on unwinding. And why you could say, just go back to that thesis in the book that says, an offsetting amount of, no matter when it comes, it has to mathematically be that much more.
Right.
It has to come. So you have two really bad choices. You can let the system collapse, and now that choice is getting actually worse, because you could either let the system collapse, or you could print into it, and energy prices are going to explode, and you're going to give, by energy prices exploding, your geopolitical rivals more power.
Let's take a quick break and hear from our show sponsors. The BCB podcast is sponsored by Capital Logistics. Capital Logistics is a freight broker connecting truck drivers and shipping partners around North America. A true blue-collar business that supports blue-collar Bitcoin. They specialize in temperature-controlled cargo, efficiently hauling food, supplies, and other freight nationwide for some of America's largest companies. Capital Logistics is a firm believer that people and businesses should be able to save what they earn without having their purchasing power manipulated by the financial system, ravaged by inflation and currency debasement. As early adopters of innovative systems throughout their business, Capital's excess cash flow is put into Bitcoin every month. If you're someone that wants to work with a company that shares blue-collar values and an affinity for Bitcoin, reach out to Capital Logistics today. Find them online at capitallogisticsllc.com. That's capitallogisticsllc.com.
What if you didn't have to pay healthcare premiums anymore? What if you could invest in Bitcoin instead? With CrowdHealth, you can put aside money for health expenses in your own account and even hold a large part of it in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes up, you get the upside, not big insurance companies. Pay one low monthly total to fund your account that is yours. Choose your doctors and hold up to 75% of the funds in Bitcoin. If a large expense comes up, CrowdHealth will crowdfund the bill for you to pay quickly. Stop supporting the broken health insurance system with your hard-earned capital. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use code BLUE now and experience freedom from health insurance by utilizing Bitcoin. Right now, you can get your first 6 months for just $99 per month. That's a fraction of high-deductible insurance plans. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use code BLUE to sign up. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code BLUE. CrowdHealth is not insurance. It's a totally different way of paying for healthcare. Terms and conditions apply.
BCB Podcast is sponsored by Ledden. Ledden is a very unique financial services company with a highly principled, Bitcoin forward perspective. They are the first ever digital asset lending platform to undergo a formal proof of reserves attestation, where an independent public accountant regularly confirms that the company is properly accounting for client assets. Simply put, this company mirrors and embraces the transparency, accountability, and auditability of the Bitcoin protocol and network itself. If you've listened to BCB, you certainly noticed that we advise our listeners to be careful, manage risk, and never get over-leveraged. And that does include ensuring that any borrowing and lending decisions make sound mathematical sense based on your lifestyle and specific situation. Where available in your jurisdiction, Ledden offers a menu of powerful financial services. Keep ownership of your Bitcoin and access dollar loans with Ledden Bitcoin-backed loans. Harness your Bitcoin holdings to buy a new property or finance the home you already own with the upcoming Ledden Bitcoin mortgage product. Save Bitcoin and USDC to have access to Ledden dollar loans in their trading service if available. You can look into Ledden's well-architected menu of services at ledden.io, that's LEDN.io, and visit start.ledden.io/blue-collar-Bitcoin and sign up to get $10 USDC for creating and funding an account.
Blue Collar Bitcoin Podcast is brought to you by arguably the most legendary company in Bitcoin, CoinKite. Established block 141,000, CoinKite is an industry leader in security and signing devices. They are also the producers of the renowned Cold Card, the world's most trusted and secure Bitcoin signing device. Built with a plethora of features fit for Bitcoin beginners all the way up to the most advanced users. This device is a one-stop shop for your Bitcoin custody needs. CoinKite also manufactures the Block Clock, a gorgeous e-ink digital art piece sitting in the background of every serious Bitcoiner on planet Earth. Block Clock can be programmed to scroll through key Bitcoin metrics including price, hash rate, next halving date, and much more. They are also the makers of the Open Dime, a small USB stick that allows you to spend Bitcoin like a dollar bill, pass it along multiple times. Check out CoinKite's whole suite of products, including the Sats card, tap signer, seed plate, and that honey badger hat you know you've always wanted at coinkite.com. Use promo code BCB for 5% off select purchases, including the Cold Card, at coinkite.com.
Now back to the show.
And so now the U.S. is kind of forced to essentially cause a demand destruction to try to get energy prices down. But that demand destruction will eventually create a cascading debt collapse, which they're going to.
This is Groman was on last week talking about, hey folks, we had an everything bubble and it included tax receipts. You know what I mean? Back to I gave some numbers a second ago. Yeah, well, they're expecting 4.8 trillion coming in. If you let the system unwind and you destroy demand, guess what's not coming in? 4.8 trillion. It just makes this is where the catch-22, the rock in a hard place, really comes into play. Because
sure. This is important. I mean, so people could look it up. But in 1987, there was I can't remember the three physicists. I talked about it a bit. Block Boom, but there
Their
was
hedge fund.
It's called the sandpile game, and it's chaos theory and how systems operate. And this is probably a really important thing for people who are thinking about Bitcoin, what this looks like, what the existing system looks like, and trying to time the events of the existing system. And in that sandpile game, what you do is imagine sand on a table and an arm going around and dropping 1 grain of sand at a time. And what they found from that is you could never tell, millions of tries, you could never tell what grain of sand caused the cascading collapse or the collapse. So things reached a critical state. Critical state is important in physics. Water to ice is a critical state. And critical state on an avalanche is one grain of sand cascades the sand pile. So sometimes 100,000 grains of sand, sometimes 5 grains of sand. As those grains of sand, so then they created a computer model to do the same thing, ran it over and over and over again. And they created it, and what they did is they color-coded stable states green and critical states or near critical states red. And so what you'd have over time is this thing evolving and hitting critical states in different places, and you'd have a small avalanche of sand. But what they saw through the computer program is the fingers of instability, as you kept doing it, raced throughout the sand pile. And what that meant is 1 grain of sand in the right spot could cascade the entire thing down to the ground. If you look through, and what it says in nonlinear systems, trying to predict the grain of sand is impossible. But everybody thinks they can predict the grain of sand.
Yeah.
And what that also means is A plus B equals C. In retrospect, everyone will say, yeah,
exactly.
Grain of sand.
There will be the one guy who picked that one by random.
Right. It could have been it could have been any one of them. And what today, our entire economic system globally is that sandpile game. It's a nonlinear system reaching a critical state globally. And there's tons of different events that are going to change it. And everybody's going to say, I predicted the one. Mm-hmm. And that's why I just go back to the macro, the big macro on what's the big game that's playing. And is the thesis still sound? So is deflation still happening? Is that happening? And do we have a system that's preventing it? What would that cause people to do? Because one of the things you won't think about in that when you're looking at events, you won't think about how people's minds change, right? I use this example all the time. I wanted a BlackBerry. I wanted the buttons on my BlackBerry. I was convinced I would never use an iPhone, and because I never saw an iPhone. And then an iPhone came out, and I changed like that. BlackBerry was dead, and a whole bunch of other people changed like that. BlackBerry was dead. I could have never predicted my change until a new solution was in front of me that I saw. And so when you apply all of that with all people, minds changing around the world and how that can cascade, that butterfly effect cascading from one thing to another, how fast these cycles can change, you can't actually pick the grain of sand.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good anecdote for the situation we're in, for sure.
Let's
what
talk.
What do you think the world actually transitions after? Let's just call this whole thing over with. And what do you view the world looking like post what we're seeing at the moment right now? How does this deflationary world operate, and how is that completely counterintuitive to how we all tend to think because of what we're in this fiat world today?
Yeah, it's almost 100%. There's 180 degree shift, and we will see that we value things that our time is valuable. And we'll spend that time as things come down in price. We'll spend that time in a whole bunch of different ways. It'll create a new renaissance. It'll create for the people in this. And actually, I can already see it when you're investing on top of companies that are building this new world, like in layer 2 and 3 solutions, and what's happening. Mm-hmm. You're seeing all of the innovation coming, and you're seeing what's all of the entrepreneurs that are essentially building the bridge to a better world. So it's really exciting. And I often, just to shock people out of their worldview that they're in, I often ask people in a party, why aren't people around here bringing you oxygen masks and selling oxygen to you? Because it's the most valuable thing in your life. You should be able to make a lot of money on that, right? And they go, oh no, that'd be crazy. Oh yeah. Think about all of the other things that are just as crazy because you're not letting prices fall. And so we think it's ludicrous that you'd have to sell oxygen where oxygen's abundant. You can only sell oxygen where there's a market for it, like in space or underwater, where it's scarce. Yet we're trying to stop with our monetary system the abundance gain from technology from reaching us. You want insane. That's it. So essentially, and you've heard me say this probably, but abundance and money creates scarcity everywhere else. Everywhere else.
Yep.
Scarcity and money creates abundance everywhere else. It's a really simple concept, but it's true. And it's including in energy. It's including in raw materials. If you take that artificial intelligence and you take the robotics, what I was talking about there, it's not like we haven't had increasing energy. It's not like we haven't had reduction in energy costs, fracking, a whole bunch of different ways to be more productive in energy, storage, production, equipment. So why are energy prices so high? And energy prices are so high because we have an abundance in money.
It's a profound theme.
Yeah. I thought it was Putin's price hike.
Yeah. Jeff, one of my favorite parts of Price of Tomorrow and The Greatest Game, the follow-up article, is you just talking about how powerful network effects are and how much of a dramatic improvement is required to make headway on an incumbent monopoly. So one thing you explore in The Greatest Game is we could say that, centrally controlled fiat currencies have a monopoly on money, and here comes Bitcoin trying to upend that network effect. Why does Bitcoin have the 10x plus advantage? Like what about this thing is so dramatic that it's going to have a chance of upending a monopoly, and a monopoly, mind you, that has all the guns and aircraft carriers and a monopoly over violence, you could say. This is like an ultra monopoly. What gives you the inclination that this thing is going to upend that system?
So at the highest level, technology, people believe, and by the way, when you're investing in technology companies or creating technology companies, you're always going up against the monopolies. You see the same thing. The existing world believes in the monopoly that they'll kill the startup. Sears believed that they had the advantage. Blockbuster believed that they had the advantage. What technology does is it offers more value to the people the furthest away from a monopoly. A massive more value from people furthest away from.
That's why it starts on the margins. Yeah.
So who goes first is the people furthest away from the monopoly, and whether that monopoly regards to money, or a company inside of on top of money, it's the same process. And so what's happening with Bitcoin is there was a monopoly on money, and the people furthest away from the monopoly of money, El Salvador, makes perfect sense why they would go first, because they're most harmed by the monopoly of money. And there's a whole bunch of other nations that are most harmed by the monopoly of money that are starting to wake up and make this transition. And so that transition is, but it's not just nations, it's people in nations that are most hurt, that they move first, and it provides them abundance. And that's just why if you just looked at that Sears versus Amazon as an example, and your path to a future brighter world is dependent on your view of that future brighter world. But now you have a peer-to-peer network that's, let's call it 150 million strong, right, on Bitcoin, growing exponentially. that is like its own nation, that can trade peer-to-peer and nobody can stop them, nothing you can do. And more businesses are going to be built on top of that, taking advantage of that peer-to-peer economy. And it's going to form a new peer-to-peer internet on top of that. So it's not just money. It's something that is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And if you're listening to your podcast and you're just hearing this for the first time, it is highly likely that you're looking backwards at Bitcoin and you're looking at the base layer technology that is the kind of the bearer asset, and you're not seeing the innovation that's happening on top of it through Lightning or Fediment or other different Taro, the other different technologies that are going to create an entirely new future. Just like if you were looking at TCP/IP, which was created by DARPA in 1969, right? Didn't form the World Wide Web until layer 4, HTTP, formed the World Wide Web in 1989. That was layer 4. And then if you were in 1989, most people misjudged what was going to be built on top of that new foundation, and missed all of the innovation that was going to happen, which is really everything that this podcast right now lives on top of that protocol layer. So all of that innovation. So that protocol innovation is actually happening, and they harden slowly. That's what I explore. I explore that pretty deeply in that new piece that I asked you to link to, Finding Signal in a Noisy World. So people could, I think it's a good piece to explain where we are, and we're early in that change.
It also makes me think of you exploring starting narrow and then broadening as you challenge an incumbent network. So you think about, let's go back to the internet example. Even once we're into that fourth layer, most people in the beginning just saw, you could say that the internet took hold with the email application, right? This is just something that people are exchanging emails. It's just going to obsolete snail mail. Fast forward 20 years and it's inhaled basically all of information worldwide. Like, who envisioned that early on? So the wedge got in the door and then, forced the door wide open and then took the whole house, to go to a firefighting analogy. And then you think about Bitcoin. If we transpose that on top, getting entrenched, as you could say, a store of value, hard, inelastic monetary asset, right? And then, as you speak of, as we go to layers on top of it, realizing, holy shit, this thing may take over basically all money applications at some point in the future, but that's really hard to conceptualize sitting here today.
And that's just, and when I say all money applications, I mean all applications. I think this is going to form the new internet. It's going to form the new peer-to-peer internet. And so if you own Bitcoin and own it in cold storage, but if you own Bitcoin, effectively what you have is value of everything that is built on top of it is going to accrue to that Bitcoin. Now, here's an interesting thing that a lot of people miss. You probably don't miss it, but a lot of people do. What they think that means is Bitcoin, the holders of Bitcoin have all the power forevermore. And what it actually means is all prices forever fall against Bitcoin. But to be able to gain more Bitcoin, what that means is you need to provide value to society. And otherwise you're distributing your Bitcoin and losing your power.
Right. Yeah, it will get equally disseminated to everybody, especially if you have a large holding, you can do nothing, but you will be disseminating it. Absolutely.
Yeah. You'll be moving it on. You will be forced to. Now, I'm going to put a caveat to that. If you created, it won't happen because of the way that Bitcoin's scaling in layers, and because now you have a peer-to-peer network. But if you just had the bearer asset and you created the existing debt-based system on top of the bearer asset, it wouldn't look very much different than the existing system.
Right. Jeff, I want to go back for a second and make sure I understood what you were saying. Were you saying that you believe that the internet as it exists now might transition onto something akin to the Lightning Network and actually operate on Bitcoin more holistically, or was that more of a...
Yeah, no. So as it exists, I think that over time you're going to port onto Bitcoin and a peer-to-peer network, and
simply because it's not controlled by anybody. It's an open, free marketplace.
And so if you see the innovation that's happening on top of that open marketplace, and now the money that's starting to move into it, you can. So in Ego Death Capital, we've seen over 300 companies. We haven't announced all three that we've led the investments in, but we announced Fetty and two more are upcoming. But if you see some of the innovation and what's happening in this space and the entrepreneurs in this space, you're just blown away by what's coming. Now, add to that, I'm getting calls now from major VC funds, one of which has said, "I followed your work for a long time. We couldn't invest on top of Bitcoin because there was nothing to invest on top of. There was no way to build on top of it. But now there is, and we'll follow anything you do."
Interesting.
And so you can see a wall of money now opening up to spark that innovation. And what she also said is, we invested in all the altcoin stuff, and we realized it's mostly a scam. We didn't realize it then. We thought you could build on top of it. But we realized that a simple question just goes to on any of the other things. If you're having a centralized blockchain, why wouldn't you use a database? The economic reason alone negates any value for having running it on a blockchain, because somebody has to pay for it.
Yeah, there are very few applications for a blockchain, truthfully. Very few. And
Seems
we
like
often
only
say,
one.
we often say, like, a lot of these other crypto projects are building, fancy master bathrooms on the third floor with a foundation built on sand. And here come, a few storms have rolled in recently, and here comes Bitcoin. It just keeps building and building, and now we're on the first floor of the house, and things are starting to look pretty. You're starting to see a very viable, robust application layer, which you're hinting to. And it is, move slow, don't break things, get the base layer right. It's the only possible way you're going to challenge the incumbent system. If there's any even small crack or hint of instability or centralization, right, it's going to be swallowed up, right? Blockbuster's going to eat it alive, right? So when you're up against something this significant, decentralization is king, and there just cannot be mistakes at the base.
But Dan, let's dig into that a little deeper, because I think it's important, really important. Humanity has never had decentralization and security together. And just push on that, or think about that for any of your listeners. It's never existed. So what we did to protect ourselves from institutions gaining too much control over ourselves, and that protection that gave us power also enabled a free market to be able to deliver more value to society. That protection existed in things like the Magna Carta, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. That it's essentially a law that gives rights to individuals, and those rights to individuals powered better economies. And those better economies, because the power was in us and our ideas could manifest, delivered more value to society. But we had to do that, because we could never have decentralization and security together. So we had to trust institutions. But we put those institutions in check with Declaration of Independence, Magna Carta, things like that, to be able to stop them from using their power, because we knew, even back in history, we knew that absolute power corrupts. So, but what you have to ask yourself is, and this is what's happening with this decentralization and security together, what you have to ask yourself is, and a lot of people don't know this. They think the law protects them. But money is way more important than laws. Because, and I can prove it, because if it wasn't, where money was most broken would have the best laws. Right. Money doesn't protect. So what ends up happening is laws are subservient to money, because the people with the money write the laws.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or hold people or take people off of a money standard, like what Trudeau is trying to do in Canada, so that they can't even attack the law. They can't even, they don't have a voice. And this happens all over the world throughout time. And it's the first time that we've ever had decentralization and security together. And that right, that right changes everything. It changes the way that we think about institutions, because we don't require the same institutions to protect us anymore. And those institutions that were supposed to protect us can't get corrupted by money to harm us.
It's interesting that you bring up this entire way of looking at it, because the Magna Carta was really the first time in history when we had any kind of freedom written down for the average person. And then the Constitution kind of kicked it up a notch again. And all of the real innovation that's happened in the world, all the real leaps and bounds in technological innovation and betterment of humanity has happened generally in the Western world, where people are free to benefit from bettering other people, the marketplace, like the freest market in the world. And if you look at places like China, not to bash them or anything, but they generally don't innovate because there's no reward for the individual. The individual is, it's like almost more like a colony. You don't get the benefit.
And I think there are a lot of people would look at China right now with recency bias, and they would say that's not true, because of the debt that there's never been a country that's created so much debt as fast as China. So you have this massive push of money that's created a bunch of innovation. But if you look throughout time, if you look at a longer course of history, and you just say money is the thing that connects our labor all over the world, the information that connects our labor all over the world, what that would mean is when you had trust in money, like the Declaration of Independence created, Magna Carta created, that trust in information held us together. And what that meant is you had more minds. Essentially, you had a supercomputer that could act together, because each of us if we had to do everything to put our meal on the plate that one night, all our day would be food and lodging. Right. But as we connect together through trust, we essentially build a supercomputer of minds. And that's why the biggest cities had more compute power based on trust. And the smaller cities, people moved to the bigger cities because there were more opportunities, and smaller cities there wasn't as much coming out of smaller cities. Smaller towns didn't have as much innovation coming out because we acted together as a supercomputer. And inversely, where money was most broken, you could have a big city and nothing happened.
Yeah.
Right. And so these things are completely connected. And to I think the point you're saying is that freedom for us, our ideas that we would never have otherwise seen. We wouldn't have seen them because they didn't exist. And there's no way to centralize those ideas without a free market, is critical to our species evolving. Right. It's absolutely critical, because otherwise you have to reduce. Society must crumble because it's centralizing power. Its centralizing power has to predict all ideas, not just predict all ideas, predict what we will do on the new ideas.
Absolutely. Where I was going to go with that is that the difference this time between those constructs is that this is uneffable. Like this is an effigy that can't be deviated by any amount of money. Like Bitcoin doesn't change no matter who wants to change it or how much money they have to change it. Whereas laws and constitution can be.
Yeah. It's actually why central bank digital currency will not work. It'll be tried. It'll be tried in a whole bunch of places, but it cannot work functionally with what we just talked about. It's impossible. It must deliver less to you, every single person of society, except for the people that are right at the top controlling that.
You could say that in a lot of ways, centralization inhibits mankind's hive mind. You know, you're talking about the supercomputer a second ago. Like, when we're throwing out words like decentralization and permissionless, what we're really talking about is freedom to innovate, right? And this is probably what's unique sitting in your seat at Ego Death Capital, looking at all these innovators. And there's still a lot of red tape. Like, a lot of these companies still have to adhere to regulation, but they're building on top of a base layer monetary protocol with exponentially fewer rules than, say, the fiat system, right? If someone sits here today and says, Josh and I have a brilliant idea to take banking to the next level and challenge, Chase and Citi, like, good fucking luck, right? But if you have an idea, it can be built, ideated, and tried on the Bitcoin protocol by yourself in your basement, and it can be utilized by people internationally without permission from anyone, right? And so as a result of this permissionlessness, this freedom inherently leads to exponential innovation. That's a lot of what we've gotten at.
And there'll be a transition period from old system to new system that doesn't look like that because there's going to be so much damage created from the existing system. But inside the new system, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see this great exponential innovation.
You're seeing it. I know there's probably not a lot you can share. What's kind of blowing your mind the most in the seat you're in?
It's how much is happening here. Broadly, how much is happening here, and it's coming from everywhere. It's so exciting when you see it's not just wallet applications. It's applications that if you talk about Fediment as an example, Fediment and Taro and Lightning together are going to create a whole bunch of different use cases that we can't even see today, and those use cases are going to expand, and entrepreneurs are going to take advantage of those and create other use cases. And that interoperability, some of it like people are going to hit walls. They're going to have to overcome barriers and everything else. But that is coming, and lots of innovation is coming to the space as a result of it. One thing I find interesting in the space is investing in the space is knowing this. Knowing that when you're investing in a company in the Bitcoin ecosystem that has to deliver value to others to stay relevant, then they're actually, over time, the thing that they're building can't create a monopoly. It can't.
Yeah, it's not really possible.
So what ends up happening is they're going to create themselves out of existence unless they continue to innovate, because the thing that they're delivering, based on, even if you looked at Lightning and all the different Lightning instances, it's open source. Right. So other people can create competitors that constantly push down the price of things. The only way that you can stay in business for a long time is to offer more and more value and attack other industries that are high margin monopolies. So you drive that ecosystem across everything. The result of all of that is prices continue to fall for all society, and it's a natural process.
Do you have any concerns about Bitcoin in general? Like, what do you think its weakness is? If the government really did want to take this thing down, what are your worries about it in general, is what I'm asking.
In the short term, I don't have any worries. In the long term, I think even in China, with hard clampdown Bitcoin mining, 20% of the hash rate is still in China.
Crazy.
It's crazy.
Crazy. 20% of the hash rate's in China.
Yeah,
they did everything. They threw everything in the kitchen sink at it.
It's probably government officials.
Yeah, exactly.
But probably
dead serious.
It's human nature. It's human nature. It's designed.
If you don't think that that's going on, you're naive, man. The mistake that's made in insulary groups is thinking everybody else is an idiot. It's made in Bitcoin all the time, and I'm telling you, the people running these nation states are not idiots. A lot of them are hyper intelligent, and they understand the potential. At least some of them understand the potential implications. I'm guessing it's going on. If it's not, it's going to be going on. A lot of backdoor mining with nobody knowing about it. A lot of stacking Bitcoin on
backdoor
sovereign balance
mining
sheets without any citizen knowing about it.
And then but if to Josh, one thing right now with the U.S. and Russia just recently saying they're going to accept crypto broadly for oil and gas. Now, does that create miners in the U.S. kind of being KYC'd and everything else, and forcing them not to approve other blocks?
Yeah.
So that
would be a small impediment, though. I mean, that would just maybe delay a block or two.
We have to pull it out, right?
Yeah.
You asked kind of what is the thing.
Well, I've got one. I've got one, and just to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
You guys are familiar with what happened with Tornado Cash? Was an open source developer who is now in prison. That is the largest area of the fanny in the air, in my opinion. Like these developers start getting heat, and they're going to have to either pretend that they're not doing it anymore or stop doing it altogether. That's a concerning point for me.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to comment specifically on Tornado Cash. I think that so that is obviously the wrong thing, putting said developer into jail. I think he was thumb in the eye of a whole bunch of
sure he was,
and he won't stay in jail as a result of this. I suspect, but all of this, I can see what's happening even in Fediment as a result of it, and so people just move underground more, and
they go Satoshi.
They continue to develop, and what that says is as the U.S. is weakening, and think of what's happening from the highest level. What you're saying is the only reason the existing system survives is based through more and more coercion, and that coercion has to expand at a greater and greater rate, which means it's going to amplify more and more people understanding what's happening.
Yes,
and it's going to create it's going to create the
it's like a Chinese finger trap for them.
Exact opposite effect that you think it is.
Yep. Jeff, let's end here. You're obviously extremely passionate about entrepreneurship, and I think most people are familiar, but your background's insanely robust. You built a $500 million company from the ground up in your garage. You've sat on tons of boards through the years, talking about your VC work now. What message do you have to Bitcoin entrepreneurs, like people that have an idea or are searching for an idea and want to add value to this space? What would your message be to them? What mistakes have you seen? What direction would you push them?
I've written about this in a couple of the different posts in different ways. Like in The Greatest Game, I talked about where I see a lot of entrepreneurs go wrong. They try to do everything right away. And being the biggest fish in a small overlooked pond is normally the best way to expand into a bigger pond or lake. So win a market first, and that win a market is what delivers the most value to other people that they can't say no to. Just do that. Don't think about yourself at all. Think about, what am I going to do, and be really ruthless. And if you're getting feedback that this isn't delivering value, it's not the world conspiring against you, it's you conspiring against the world. So deliver value. And then when I say that, then test that hypothesis over and over and over again. Talk to VCs, talk to other people. Say, if I built this and it looked like this, what would it look? Would you use it? How much would you pay for it? What would that look? Would this make a difference in your life? And a lot of people say, no, that doesn't. But it won't work. And don't just naturally jump away. Push back. But refine your pitch. Refine your way of talking about your idea over and over and over again. But ultimately, the highest thing is build value for others.
Well said. Thank you.
Jeff, we could go forever. We won't. We'll have you back on again some other time. Maybe we'll bring you down here. We'll see what you got wake surfing. Josh has a wake surfing boat. He's a bit of an
successfully broke someone's finger from work on it this year.
He's an aggressive boat handler, Jeff.
He's just got a limp wrist. He's got a weak
You do
grip.
not want to go tubing on the back of Josh's boat. That's how you end a firefighting career, Jeff. Is you go tubing on the back of Josh's boat. Give us a handoff. Yeah, give us a handoff. We'll link that out. The new article, which somehow we haven't read, Josh. We reread The Price of Tomorrow and other things.
I don't know how we missed that one.
A couple of degenerates didn't read your most recent article, but hand off to you, your work, what you want our audience to know about here as we close.
We should have just said we did.
Yeah, we should have lied.
Sorry,
we fucked up.
I think follow me at Jeff Booth on Twitter. That's probably best.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah, the longer we're around you, the more we resonate with your perspective. And as we said off the top, these are fun ideas to explore, but they're also maybe the most important thing going on in the world right now. Numbers and money matter a shit ton, and they have a lot of implications, and we need an upgrade, gentlemen.
We're gonna look back on this time and all of the people in this space, and all of the great people in this space, and look back at those were the days. I think there's a really exciting time to be in this space, and so I've learned more from people in this space than I've gotten more than I've given.
Oh, we certainly have as well.
Yeah, we just get to sit here and ask questions and learn from the best without really developing anything of substance. We're just free riders over here.
Yeah, we're basically leeches.
Leeches on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Every one of us is a node in the new system. Every one of us counts.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.